Hello students, now we have reached at the end of our chapter which is system design. So there are some of the form driven methodology which you need to know, which are the IPO chart and also the HIPO chart. So now I'll be discussing regarding the IPO chart. This IPO chart is one of the tools which the programmer used during designing the program, and it is done before coding. The IPO chart are the areas for the input, processing and output, and it also helps you to plan what your program needs to do. Just to make you understand, so I'll give a very simple example like 1 plus 1. So this 1 plus 1 is the input which you have given in your calculator. So and before producing an output, it does some work, like it process the task. So this is the processing, and after processing only you get the output which is 2. So this is a very simple example of the IPO. So let's have a look at the HIPPO and the IPO chart. The HIPPO is a form-driven technique in that standard forms are used to document the information. So this HIPPO chart is a form-driven technique in the standard form, and it is used to document the various information, and it consists of a hierarchy. It contains the hierarchy chart and the associated set of the input, process and output charts. And here the HIPPO chart captures the essence of the top-down decomposition. Like it describes the data which is input and the output from the processing, and also defines the data flow composition. So let's look at the very short origination of the HIPPO chart. The HIPPO was developed by the IBM as a design aid and implementation techniques with this following objectives. So why the HIPPO chart is being developed? Because there is certain objective, and for that reason only the IBM have developed the HIPPO chart. So it provides a structure by which the functions of a system can be understood. So we'll look at the diagram, how it provides a structure by which the function of a system can understand. So here it is given like compute, like for computing the salary, you have compute pay, and from that compute, like it is very organized. You see there is 1.0, and after that there is 2.0, 3.0. So let's look at after 1.0, you can see there is 2.0 and it is being divided, and as it is divided you can see there is 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and when the 2.2 gets further decomposed, so you can see there is 2.2.1, 2.2.2, so it's easier. So this is the hierarchy diagram, how it is being decomposed. So like for compute gross pay, here the gross pay over here has the sum hours worked and determine pay rate, compute and record gross pay. And like for determine pay rate, like how will determine the for paying the employee. So here like verify employee number, we have to verify the type of the work, look up pay rate. This is just an example to know the hierarchy diagram of a HIPPO. So the objective of the HIPPO is also to state the functions which is required to perform by the program, rather than specifying the program statements to be used to perform the functions. So once when you are able to state the functions of your project, obviously you will be able to handle it. But if you are very confused to go with the project and without knowing the functions, so it is difficult for you. when you specify the program statements. So for that it is very important to know first the function. So this HIPPO helps to identify the various functions that the project will perform. And in the last point we see provide a visual description of input to be used and output to be produced. So it's very simple. So now let's look at the procedure of generating HIPPO. First of all, it begins with the highest level of abstraction and define the inputs to the system and output from the aggregate terms. Here it defines first the inputs to the system, and then it helps us to understand what is the output from the one which we have inputted. So the next we have identify the processing step by those that convert input into output. The third point, document each element using HIPPO diagram notation and the associated tree-like structure. So we'll discuss regarding these points when we see at the chart. Number 4, identify sub-processes and their respective inputs and outputs. Continue decomposition until the process cannot be decomposed. So once when you are able to identify the sub-process and the respective inputs and outputs, so you continue to decompose until and unless the process cannot be decomposed further. So this is the HIPPO diagram, which is derived from the hierarchy diagram. So this is derived from this one only. Okay. Here you can see this is from 2.0. So let's look at 2.0 from the hierarchy diagram. Here 2.0 you have the compute gross, and from the compute gross it is further decomposed with the sum hours work, determined pay, compute and record gross pay. So even here you'll be able to see some hours work, determined pay rate for job, compute and record gross pay. The same thing only, but it's here like since it's a combination of the HIPPO and IPO chart, IPO which is the input processing output. So here we have the payroll, job record and the payroll master is, so over here this is the data flow, like how from this one, how the input for the payroll of the job record and the payroll master does the processing and then it gives the output. So this is being decomposed from the process or from the entity which is 2.0, and this one we get from the hierarchy notation diagram. Here the process which is here is that like it might be kind of a calculation regarding the total amount, the hours worked, and also the processing is done by determining the pay rate for the job and compute the record for the gross pay, all these calculation. So after that only the output might be an error message, or or it might get recorded to the gross pay file or the payroll master. So when there is each and every input process and output of the hierarchy diagram, so the analysts or the programmers will be easy to go further with the project because they know what will be the input and what will be the output. So now we'll look at the structured walkthrough. So by the term walkthrough, it means to guide someone carefully through a process. So here it is an interchange of ideas among peers who reviewed a product represented by its author and agree on the validity of a proposed solution to a problem. Here in the walkthrough is basically an exchange of ideas how to go about. So when you exchange your ideas, obviously your project will be successful. And even when you are stuck with some of the designing phase, so there'll be someone to help you out. But suppose you are placed in a field to do your project, but if there is no walkthrough, if there is no discussion, so obviously it'll be very difficult for you being a programmer to get all the solution. Even when you face the problem, if you don't approach anyone, so obviously you will not know how to go about it. And during the walkthrough, its purpose is to anticipate as many problems in the design as possible when they are still in the paper triggers, like when they are still doing or making designing with the pen and paper. It's very important to get as many problems as possible, because when they get many problems and if they are able to solve at the initial stage, so there is a saying which says a stitch in time saves nine. So obviously when they are able to get all the problems during the initial stage, so they'll be able to solve it after getting all the problems, and then they can sit down and complete their task. So this structured walkthrough is, the objective of it is to come up with a manageable design which is flexible and adaptable and meets the organization standards. So it also required the user involvement. Walkthrough may be held at various points in the system development life cycle. The probability of success improves with user interest and involvement in the design of system. The user involvement gives the designer important feedback as the design is being completed. And it also provides the user with a basic understanding of what the candidate system will do and what will not do. So here, when the customer is involved during the various development life cycle, suppose during the various points of the development life cycle, so when they involve the users or their customers who are telling them to make a project, so obviously sometimes when he calls the customer, so if they are satisfied, means that even at the end of the project they'll be very satisfied. So it is better for them to show the customers at the beginning, like when the programmers have done everything, their coding and all that, for example, and when they show the customer at the end, sometimes they might be satisfied, and they might also be not satisfied with the task, because since there is no user involvement, so if any changes is needed at the initial stage, so they can inform the programmers that this is not exactly I want, please do these changes. So it's very important. And this walkthrough is not only important for the programmers and the customer, but the walkthrough is also important, like the analyst or the design member team, like when they come and see the task of what the one programmer is doing with the particular project, and to check and review like whether it is fine or not and give them some ideas. So it is very important regarding the walkthrough. And this walkthrough is very important so that the programs which they are doing, the projects which they are making, will be balanced without errors. So now we'll look at the personnel allocation. Structured approach to design and implementation is useful in facilitating the planning process. Emphasis is on allocating the right programmers to the task within a realistic timetable. So here it says that it is very important on emphasizing and allocating the right programmers to the right tasks. Allocation means for allocating people, so the analysts should decide which programmers to give which kind of task. So now we'll look at the audit consideration. By the term audit, the one thing which strikes in your mind should be an official inspection of an organization. Here, audit is a kind of an inspection. So, let's read on with this. A well-designed system should have control to ensure proper operation and routine auditing. A candidate system's failure often results from a lack of emphasis on data control. Therefore, standards of accuracy, consistency, and maintainability must be specified to eliminate errors and control for fraud. In the company, basically, there are many frauds. Maybe one of the member is very careless and the data might be leaked, or even in the bank, the auditing their ledger account and so many kinds of different accounts which you have. So if they are not being maintained properly, and or maybe sometimes the suppose if the files are lost, the important files are lost, a kind of files which keeps the record of the loan or of the transaction, if those files are lost, so it is very like it's a kind of huge loss for the company or the bank or any organization. So for this reason, in order that these things will not happen, it is very important that the president of the organization or the chairman of organization or anyone who is looking for the audit should come and check the task performed by the employee. The auditing is very important because if no one checks them, so they might make a mistake or they might not even remember to keep the things properly and do the task properly in a proper way. So for this reason, the audit also is very important. So when there is audit, obviously there is an accuracy, and those employees also, they will do their task properly without any mistake. So now we'll look at the audit trial and the documentation control. The primary purpose of auditing is to check that controls built into design of the candidate system ensures its integrity. Audit consideration must be incorporated at the early stage in the system development so that the changes can be made in time. So here, like since our subject is based on the program and the project, so here the auditing is a kind of frequently check of the analysts to the programmers who is being allocated with different tasks. So they can check the input, the output, and all the other things which is required by the project. So this audit trial is performed that the staffs or the employee will do their tasks very properly and the data will not be lost or easily stolen. Sometimes even the record also is very difficult to trace, like regarding the transaction, because sometimes the records are being stored in the magnetic medium like the tape, disk, etc. And also the data processing activities are difficult to observe because they take place within the computer system, and sometimes it's very difficult to get all the information. So it is very important, like the transaction can be recorded in a tape or it can be placed somewhere, so that like if one is lost, still you have the backup. And here the documentation is the basis of the internal control by internal or independent auditors. It provides a reference for the system maintenance. So even a proper documentation is needed, not only in a not only to keep the records inside a computer or any hard disk, but it is also important to document all everything which you are doing, the transaction or the task of the project which you are doing, to document them very properly. Suppose if the auditor, he wants to take along with him, like if he doesn't want the flat files or the disk, so obviously he can just take the book which he have kept all the documentation with him, and then he can check or go through what are the things or the changes which they have done, or what are the employees they are doing or going through. Documentation is the basis of internal control by internal or independent auditors. It provides a reference for the system maintenance. So this documentation, it provides it provides a reference for the system maintenance, how the system is working or how the task is going through. So it's a kind of a record in which the auditor can check and go through the document. So now we have completed the topic which is regarding the process and stages of system design. So just to give you a summary of what we have learned in this chapter, we have learned that the system design is a transition from a user-oriented document to a document-oriented to programmers or database personnel, and it also goes through the logical and physical design with the emphasis of preparing the input-output specification, preparing the security and control specification, specifying the implementation plan, preparing a logical design walkthrough before the implementation. And we have also learned regarding the structured design, that the structured design is a data flow based methodology, and it defines inputs and outputs and describes the functional aspect of the system. It partitions a program into a hierarchy modules organized in the top-down manner with a detail at the bottom. And we have also learned regarding the documentation tool, that the documentation tool is the structure chart. It has three elements. I have I've I have discussed with you regarding the three elements yesterday, which is the module, the connection, and the couple. And there is also another way of developing an input, process, and output chart for the modules, which is the HIPO chart. And this HIPO chart consists of the hierarchy chart plus the input, process, output, which is the IPO chart. And it does by capturing the essence of the top-down decomposition. So there are many things which we have learned during this topic. So thank you so much, students, for listening to this video.